The panelists we have for this discussion are, let me get the bios out here. We've got Lara Cottingham, who is Deputy Assistant Director for the City of Houston's Administrative and Regulatory Affairs, or ARA, specializing in sustainability and strategic customer initiatives. In addition to leading the city's sustainability team, she's the public face of ARA in the media, as well as before the City Council, industry stakeholders, and customers. And prior to joining the City of Houston, she provided strategic counsel in sustainability and social responsibility issues for a broad range of clients across the energy sector, and worked in DC as Communications Director for a variety of chairs and vice chairs of committees, including chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. Please welcome Lara. All right, Doug Miller is a retired television reporter. He spent almost 25 years with KHOU-TV, where his hurricane coverage won the first of 4 Emmy Awards. Right now he serves on the Houston Chronicle's editorial board, where he's written extensively about the resiliency problems exposed during Hurricane Harvey and the challenges the community faces preparing for the inevitable next storm. Please join me in welcoming Doug. Adrian Shelley is a native Texan from the city of Houston, so I don't know where that meant you were standing during the exercise. But he's the Director of Public Citizens Texas Office, which works on issues including renewable energy, environmental enforcement, and campaign finance and ethics reform. Adrian has a law degree from the University of Texas, but okay, and previously served as the Executive Director for ERA. Actually, my wife has a law degree from SMU, so we don't get along very well either way. Anyhow, he previously served as the Executive Director for ERA Alliance Houston. He enjoys spending time with his family, reading, playing music, and being outdoors, where you experience wonder on a regular basis, right? Yeah, please welcome Adrian. And our fourth panelist, Bill King, is from Houston, Texas. He was a 2015 nonpartisan candidate for Houston mayor and served as the mayor of Kemah from 2001 to 2005. Mr. King received a bachelor's degree and a JD from the University of Houston. He's a businessman and an attorney. He was president of Southwest Airport Services Incorporated, a former managing partner of Ninneberger, Godwin, Blair, and Sampson, and has also been a columnist for the Houston Chronicle. Please help me welcome Bill. Okay, so we've got a diverse panel. It grew more diverse as more panelists arrived here. So what we're going to be doing with this panel discussion is reflecting back on what happened to the community of Houston and the surrounding area during Harvey as observed and experienced for the different organizations these people are part of. Find out from them what sort of lessons they've learned, what their organizations have learned, and what we all should be learning from the experience of Harvey, and also their observations on what Houston is already doing or should be doing to look ahead in light of future storms that could be like Harvey or unlike Harvey. So we're going to start with a few brief remarks from each of the panelists. Then the bulk of our time will be open for questions from the floor, which will be written on white cards and presented to the panelists. Hopefully targeted toward the unique insights that they can provide us to take advantage of their generous sharing of their time here today. So we'll just start the way I started the introductions with Lara.
Okay. All right, can you guys hear me? Yeah. So, my name is Lara Cottingham, and like you said, I oversee the city's sustainability office. And when I got this invitation, I thought first, this would be a really great opportunity for our recovery officer, or chief recovery officer. And he wasn't available, and he sent it to my next guest, which was the chief resiliency officer. He wasn't available, so it came right back to me. So I'm going to I have notes from both of those two guys who are completely up to date on all of the things the city is doing to attack Harvey. Because it is more than one person. It is more than 3 people. It is taking every single person in the city of Houston, in the Harris County, and all of the counties that were affected. We are working on things at the local, at the state, and the national level. And apart from that, I work in the sustainability office, and what we are trying to do basically is make the city's operations more efficient, more sustainable, and really chart out a course for what does climate change mean for the city of Houston. And the fact that I'm even sitting here today talking about climate change means that the city's come a long way, because not too long ago that's something that we really wouldn't have even wanted to talk about. And we've found that over time, climate change is really being dealt with on the local level, because the state level, federal level, there's just not as much support or action taking place. That cities, local governments are on the ground. We are the first line of defense, and that's not just here in Houston, not in Texas, not just in the United States, in countries all across the globe. And so we play a role in several national and international organizations. C40 is one. There are others, the Global Compact of Mayors, the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Action, and then Houston actually is a founding member of a group called Climate Mayors. All of these groups have that same idea that mayors need to come together, and that we need to empower each other and empower our citizens to take action, because we're not really going to get help from anywhere else. And I am new to these networks, and it's just been incredibly eye-opening to learn from other cities what they're doing, and to learn that although we're constantly compared to Los Angeles and New York in our size, or we're compared to Austin and Dallas because they're in Texas, in a lot of ways Houston has more in common with Manila than we do with any of these cities, because of the specific things that we're faced with are really different, and cities have so much to learn from each other. And I'm happy to talk more about that. And then also some of the things that we're working on here in Houston in our sustainability office. Harvey threw a wrench in everything all across the board. And talking specifically about climate change, we've been working for a long time on a climate action plan for the community. Houston's one of the only cities that doesn't have one for a lot of reasons, but one is it's really hard to talk about it, raise money for it, and then just gather data in a city the size of Houston. The way we're set up, some cities can access data more easily than others, but we said we were going to start it before Harvey. So, we're working, Harvey happens. And not only is everything put on pause, but then immediately everyone says, well, you should have done that yesterday, right? Why didn't you do this before? And so we are getting incredible support. I had calls from other countries saying, how can I help you? Which is great. And I hope that support still keeps going. And we have tentatively, knock on wood, started our plan, and we hope to finish it up by 2020, so that's really exciting. How much longer do you want me to go before I hand it over? Okay.
All right, thank you. Adrian, Shelley again with Public Citizen, based in Austin, but it's a pleasure to be back here in my hometown of Houston, and I want to really thank CCL for the opportunity to be here. One of the great things about giving a talk in your hometown is that your father crashes. So, Dad, if you just want to stand up and wave, he's in the front there. He got wind of this, so he showed up. My father is the source of all of my compassion and all of my sense of social responsibility, which put me on the path to be where I am today, so eternally grateful to him. And then also very grateful for our person on the ground here in Houston, and that's Dr. Stephanie Thomas, who is also up there in the front. Stephanie, maybe you can wave. I think a lot of y'all in the room know Stephanie, her work here, and you're going to have to forgive me. I'm going to need to read from some notes here, which is something I don't normally do. Stephanie helped me to compile a list of the impacts that we saw on the ground here during Harvey, and I was not here. Stephanie was here for that, and so I want to thank her for that, and just take a minute to share with you some of the impacts that we saw, some of which you will probably know, and some of which you may not. First of all, and most significantly to us and our work, were the impacts to the petrochemical industry. There were more than 2 million pounds of harmful air pollutants that were released throughout the region during Harvey. Compounds including carcinogens, things like benzene, toluene, xylene, pollutants that lead to ozone formation, NOx, VOCs, things that smell really bad like hydrogen sulfides, and a variety of other compounds. And people in Houston saw this. You know, they saw the oil slicks in the floodwaters. They smelled things in their neighborhoods, on the highways. You know, they felt it in their eyes and in their nose and on their skin. These impacts lasted in some cases for days after the storm, and in some cases there are still lingering impacts from people who were exposed to these kinds of pollutants. And I'll say more about that in a little while. We saw very acute impacts in one of Houston's most infamous neighborhoods, the Manchester community on the east side. There were some failures at the Valero refinery there that were unknown to the people in that community for several days. There was independent monitoring that was conducted that showed very high levels of compounds such as benzene in that community. And so those are impacts that were felt very acutely by those people and that are continuing to be felt. There were other very large failures, companies like the Galena Park terminal, the Arkema plant up in Crosby, and you know, in every case there were communities around those impacts that really keenly felt them and that continue to feel them. And that's led to continued fallout. You know, we have seen and we have heard personally of people who are dealing with lingering anxiety, mental health problems. I saw recently there was a sort of a community-led mental health session for people who are still struggling with the impacts of the storm. You know, people lost houses. There are people who are still not in their homes, who do not have vehicles, and you know, just the impact of the day-to-day life for people like that, but also the psychological impact for people like that. You know, there are people who are suffering in a very real way from PTSD to this day in Houston because of those impacts. And I think that the best thing that we can do for those people is prepare for the next storm and assure them, you know, make them see through our actions that we are prepared and that we are preparing for the next storm. And we're going to hear more about that. And Lara has already shared a lot of great things that Houston has started doing and will be doing. And I just want to lift that up. You know, in the hours and days after the storm, you know, Mayor Turner and his colleagues in the county and the state and the national, even at the global level, were making decisions to get people out of harm's way, to save lives, to save property, and to get Houston through it. And I think it was those efforts in the days and hours after the storm that led to the slogan, Houston Strong, that we're all holding up today. You know, we've seen Houston come through these things before, and each time it does so a little bit better. And I think when the next one comes, and it will come, we will see things done even a little bit better. And again, you know, this is a global effort. We have gotten international aid. We've gotten assistance from the state government. Our mayor was very dogged in working Governor Abbott to get that $50 million in disaster funding that we got. Maybe someday we'll even see funding from the federal government if they could see fit to do something there. It's not something that we can do alone. And there's a lot of really good stuff on the horizon. The Army Corps of Engineers is looking at a region-wide water management flood study. You know, we need that in order to figure out how to plot our course forward. The city right now is looking at a lot of opportunities to replace, for example, some of the vehicles that were damaged. The city itself lost its fleet. The city used to have, I think, the largest electric vehicle fleet, or close to the largest electric vehicle fleet in the nation. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of vehicles. It is something that's worth applause, right? It was the first electrical fleet in the nation, which means it was also the oldest electrical fleet in the nation. But now we got to renew it, right? So we have a chance to bring new, cleaner vehicles into Houston. So there's a lot of opportunity, but it's not something the city can do on its own. And there's a lot of good partners out there that we'll be seeing the city, the county, and the state work with in the years to come. So I think I'll stop there. And let's move on.
So I was born and raised down in Kemah. If y'all don't know, this is a little seaside village about halfway between Houston and Galveston. I was elected mayor there in 2001. And in Texas, the mayor is the emergency management officer for the city. And pretty quickly after taking the office, I concluded that we weren't prepared to evacuate Kemah, nor was the county prepared, nor was the state prepared, nor was the federal government, that nobody really had a plan for what we were going to do if a hurricane came on shore. And I started writing and talking and raising a bunch of hell about that. And then Hurricane Rita came in 2005 and proved that that was the case. That led to me serving on a gubernatorial commission after Hurricane Rita, and then serving also on the task force, the task force that rewrote the evacuation plan after Rita. And then after Hurricane Ike, I served another gubernatorial commission. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about what the effect of a major hurricane making landfall in this area. There is a storm that's referred to as the modelers as a scenario 7 storm. It's Ike plus 15% that makes landfall at about Freeport, Texas. It is a catastrophe beyond your imagining for this region. Experts estimate 5,000 to 10,000 people will be killed in that storm. Many, many billions of dollars in property damage, and an unimaginable environmental disaster. What you saw in Harvey 1,000 times over, when you think about the Superfund sites and the petrochemical plants that would all be overtopped, their levels would be overtopped, and everything that's been accumulating there for decades washed out into the general environment. The public does not understand how serious this problem can be. And it's not a question of if that's going to happen, it's a question of when is it going to happen. So what I've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years is thinking about how do we protect ourselves against that scenario. And the way climate change comes into that equation is that if whatever we're going to do is cost a lot of money, and it needs to be very long lasting. And so what in the design criteria do you need to include the fact that we're probably going to have sea level rise into the next century? And so that's how I've been involved in this issue, and happy to discuss some more. But let me just put this in perspective for you. Harvey will look like a walk in the park compared to a scenario 7 storm if it ever hits this area.
My name's Doug Miller. I was a television reporter here in Houston for longer than I'd like to remember. And I chased more hurricanes than I can possibly count, dating all the way back to Hurricane Allen in 1980. So I've done particular research on a couple of hurricanes, and it's my contention that Houston's history has been deeply affected by hurricanes already. I see a couple of faces who were at a symposium we held at the Chronicle a few weeks ago, and those who were there have heard this rapid line, so pardon me while I repeat the story that you've heard before. But in order to really understand this, you got to go all the way back to 1875. And at that time, Houston was just a backwater. I mean, they literally laughed and joked about Houston's ambitions to be a great city. Houston talked about how we had a port because we had a bayou that came up here, and they joked about it in the papers in Galveston. I've read the papers back then. But back then, there were two major port cities, Galveston and Indianola. Now, Indianola down in Matagorda County, okay, or Calhoun County on Matagorda Bay. And Galveston and Indianola were competing to be the major port city of Texas. And they were both competing to raise money to build a railroad connection to Cuero, because from Cuero there was a railroad connection. Basically, whoever got there first would be the port for everything this side of the Rockies, Denver, in essence. So those two cities were competing to raise private capital to build that railroad. 1875 comes along, September, I forget the date. This is back before weather radar, back before ship-to-shore communications. The way you found out there was a hurricane was you looked up and suddenly the storm that you thought was a minor storm was a hurricane. And much of the city of Indianola was destroyed. Pretty much the whole thing was destroyed by the storm of 1875. It was such a powerful storm that they felt the effects up in Galveston. You know, Galveston's kind of on the dirty side up there. I've read letters that people wrote, their memories of that. They're very, very vivid about snakes crawling up the sides of their houses and trying to get away from the floodwaters. It was scary stuff. That's all Galveston felt. Indianola, pretty much destroyed, but they rebuilt Indianola. And in Galveston, they started talking about how do we protect ourselves from something like this. And they started talking about a seawall. And there was some discussion in the newspapers about it. People wrote op-eds about it and so on, back and forth. But it kind of died off. 1886, September of 1886, another great storm hits Indianola. What was just left by the storm of 1875 was destroyed by the storm of 1886. Indianola is now a ghost town. If you go there, you'll see a couple of ratty beach houses that people have built there, but what you see mostly now are graveyards, cemeteries, tombstones, all bearing two dates, the dates of those two hurricanes. So up in Galveston, there was some serious discussion about building a seawall. And indeed, the state appropriated some money to get the work started on this. But they talked about it, and there were a few op-eds in the paper, you can read about it. They argued back and forth about whether it was worth the money, do we really need it, blah, 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 and it all died away. And then on September 8th of 1900, suddenly, day like this, Saturday afternoon, the water started rising from Galveston Bay and in from the shore. And basically, over where the strand was, the water got high. You know, the sidewalks are elevated there. The water came up over the sidewalks, and they knew they were in trouble. That was the Great Storm of 1900. For those of you who don't know, this is the greatest natural disaster in American history. We still don't know how many people died that day. They used census estimates to try to figure it out. Best figure I saw was 8,000 people died on that day, on that Saturday and that Sunday. 8,000. Think about that number. That's more than double the number of people who died in the terrorist attacks of September 11th. This is America's forgotten 9/11. And after that, they built a seawall. And they literally raised most of the buildings on the island. They got jacks from all over the country, raised up the buildings and literally raised the level of the island. They also founded a new way of governing cities. They started the city manager form of government. So they responded to that, and Galveston survived. It never was what it was after that. And then Houston called a city council meeting the following Monday, and they had three things on the agenda. One was fixing the roofs in Houston, getting humanitarian assistance to Galveston, and third, expediting the dredging of a ship channel, because they knew that Galveston was finished, and it was time for Houston to start building its ship channel. What I can take away from all of this is that as Harvey was hitting our city, and for the first time in my adult lifetime, I was not in the middle of a storm. I could stop and think about it a little bit, and this phrase came to my mind. It occurred to me that Harvey could be Houston's seawall moment. The moment when we decide we finally have to do something big that we've been talking about for a long time to protect ourselves from future disasters. So that's where we are. I think we're in a seawall moment. People are talking about it. Finally, we got people saying, maybe it's not such a swell idea to let developers put up subdivisions in flood pools. That's an interesting thought. So I'll leave it there. This is a seawall moment, and when I come to a seminar like this, I'm encouraged because it means people are talking big. And thank you for talking big.
Well, I see some questions from the audience, and there may be more coming as well. First question, for anybody who cares to answer it: how have the attitudes of Houstonians changed regarding climate change and extreme weather since Hurricane Harvey?
How many people are from Houston? Okay. Being the oil and gas, being the energy capital of the world, we always talk about climate change gently as to not offend much of the industry in our city. Harvey is one of those moments, but let's remember that this was the third catastrophic flood Houston's had in the past 3 years, that we could have another flood again any day now. Knock on wood, hope to God that doesn't happen, but we've reached a point where even people who say they do not believe in climate change, don't want to talk about it, any of that, something has happened. And we need to take action to change our behavior, to change our planning rules, and to talk about long-term planning differently. And I think that is really important. That those of us who are talking about climate change are talking about it, those of us who aren't, they're still talking about it. Call it weird weather, call it whatever you want, but people are ready for something different. They're tired of this happening.
Just very quickly to add to that, you may be familiar with the Yale Center for Climate Research that does polling about climate attitudes. So in Texas, and they divide it between Democrats and Republicans, and I'm going to focus on the Republican number because it's a little more interesting. In Texas, in every single Republican district, the answer to the question, do you believe that the climate is changing? The yes answers are over 50%. They're just slightly over 50%, but they are over 50%. By contrast, the question, do you believe we should act to limit CO2 pollution, hovers around 70% among Republicans. Yeah. And that tells you about something about the way people are willing to talk about the problem versus what people are willing to do about the problem. We've reached the time of action.
I want to be devil's advocate here for a minute, because the problem with the polls, like you just cited, is those must be Republicans, but they're not Republicans that vote in the primary. In the primary, this primary system has this country completely broken down. We have about 5 to 10% of the population that votes in each of the primaries, and they decide who the other 80% of us that don't participate are going to have to choose from in a general election, which is how you end up with a choice like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump for president.
Monday is the deadline to register to vote.
Yeah, and so, you might want to think about participating in the primaries a little bit more. But I'm a little jaded about this, because the history of these things are that everybody gets all excited about them for about a year or so, and then nothing happens. And we end up not doing it. Hurricane Ike, which was just this far away from being a Scenario 7 storm, happened a decade ago. And we have basically done nothing since then. And if you go back and look in history, typically nothing happens until we kill a bunch of people. That's what happened in the 1900 storm. Killed a bunch of people and they built a seawall. The Dutch killed several thousand people, and that's when they finally got serious about their seawall efforts there. We spent $12 billion in New Orleans after Katrina killed 1,800 people. I pray to God that we don't have to wait in Houston until we kill a bunch of people to do something.
Well, I was saving a remark for the end of this, but since you introduced it, some of the people who were involved in the Netherlands flood control efforts, these are good folks. They travel around the world and they advise other cities on their own flood control efforts. They came here, and we spoke with some of those people, and I bluntly asked them, I said, how long do we have? How long does this seawall moment last? They didn't miss a beat. They said, you've got 1 year, and after that, it's lost. So remember that. You got 1 year. Let me plug something, by the way. You mentioned polling. I'm proud as an alumnus of this university to say the University of Houston Center for Public Policy, in cooperation with Rice University, is doing some polling right now on how this may have changed attitudes. We should be seeing those results in a couple of weeks. But I happen to know a couple of people involved, and they're telling me that, yeah, they're picking up anger on the part of a lot of voters, especially out on the west side of Harris County. One of them told me, if you say bathrooms built with these people, they will throw something at you. They wouldn't go out.
Okay, I have two related questions here. I'll ask them both and then open up for responses. First question. As residents of Northeast Houston, we know personally several families who lost their upper middle class homes, and they have not recovered even though they have resources. What do we know about people in the area without those resources? And the second question is, how do you hope to better protect the undocumented population now during Harvey recovery and in future disasters?
Can we tackle that first? Okay. What I can address there is, yeah, you know, when I was in television, we used to get this, the occasion people would say, why aren't you paying attention to this area over here? Why aren't you telling over this area? Frankly, when you got a storm blowing in like this, you're in over your head. We were in over our heads. Literally, Channel 11 is in over its heads during this last storm. But you know, how do you focus on certain areas? And yeah, you've only got so many crews. There's only so much you can do. Only so many places you can go. And so forgive us if we didn't get to your neighbor, but that's all I can say. But the other thing I will say is that I noticed a pattern during Hurricane Ike. During Ike, I literally was, I didn't get wet during that storm, I don't think. I was indoors so much, actually on camera reading some of the reports that were coming in of fatalities. And I noticed a disproportionate number, it's anecdotal on my part, I haven't studied it, but I noticed an awful lot of people were dying. I saw a lot of Hispanic last names. And I think, and they were dying of carbon monoxide poisoning. Huge problem. People would get generators and put them inside trailers or whatever, and then they would they'd die of carbon monoxide poisoning. And I think a lot of it had to do with a language barrier that you know, people were telling me that the Spanish language television stations weren't dedicating as much time to it. We were constantly saying, watch out for carbon, you know, do not put your generator next to your house. And you know, I think there is a communication problem, you know, quite often that this, back then at least with the Spanish language media, that they weren't communicating as much of that. So yeah, there is an underservice problem going on, at least from the media standpoint. I detected that.
I think there's one sort of interesting demographic feature of Harvey. Generally, lower socioeconomic areas don't have as good a drainage systems, and so typically they're the ones that flood. But the peculiarities of this storm, it was a lot of very wealthy neighborhoods that flooded all along Buffalo Bayou, all out through River Oaks and further out west. I went to a meeting at St. John Catholic Church where they were meeting about it. It was all, I mean, everybody there was an affluent person, and they were had all been flooded. And so the one thing that I think may be a silver lining out of this is you have a bunch of people that are very active, almost all Republicans, that suddenly care about this issue in a very personal way.
I just want to say one thing about the experience of undocumented immigrants during the storm. You know, we all saw footage of people helping people in Houston, you know, lives being saved, people being pulled out of flood waters, you know, people being taken from homes, and, you know, Houston came together and people acted in the moment to save lives. And you know very well that nobody was asked about their legal status when they were being pulled out of floodwaters, right? That would be cruel. But is it any less cruel to ask about legal status when somebody is applying for FEMA aid? Is it any less cruel to ask when somebody is filing for a protective order so they can get away from an abusive spouse? You know, the immigrant experience, and the undocumented immigrant experience rather, is a slowly unfolding catastrophe in this country. And if it's cruel in that first moment, then it's cruel in those other moments as well.
I agree with everything that Adrian just said, but I will also say that the things the City of Houston is working on, we help everyone. Everything that, all of our emergency response during Harvey, all of the recovery work that we're doing, all of the planning going forward, every improvement we make will help everyone, period. In terms of the funding and FEMA, one of the problems that has been so frustrating for the community and for those of us at the city, is that we're dependent on funding from the state and from the federal government. And a good example of this is earlier this week there was a telethon on a different channel that the mayor and the county judge had, and they asked people from different departments to come and answer questions. So I was one of the people, and I was sitting next to the head of Harris County Flood Control District, and they wanted everyone to be prepared. They're going to ask hard-hitting questions about Harvey and our recovery efforts. Every single question we got for an hour and a half was about FEMA funding, from people who said, I've been denied, I need more, I don't know where my application is. And we were all, incredibly capable people who are working on hard-pressing issues. None of us could answer those questions because it is from FEMA. And it was humbling and it was heartbreaking, because we're 5 months out and hearing those same questions of people. I'm living in one room in my house. I've been living in an apartment. I want to get back in my house. All of these things, and we want to be able to help, and nobody wants to be the person saying, give it time, it's going to take more time. It is a long process, it is going to take more time. We do have resources available to help, but a lot of that is kicking those other levels of government in action, because we're mobilized and ready to help. We just can't do that without some type of resources.
Quick technical question on the progress of recovery. Are there still any active boil water notices going on in Harris County or in the city of Houston? Are all the water lines up and running?
Yes, especially from Harvey. I know that there are things that happen from time to time. There were some boil water notices right after this most recent freeze because a lot of pipes burst.
Okay, next question. How well will the Houston media cover this regional conference? How often did the local media mention climate change and effects on Harvey during or after Harvey's coverage?
How come you guys leave the mic to me? Yeah, do you see any television cameras here? We see somebody back there with a still camera, but we don't. And I'll tell you why. Frankly, conferences generally don't get covered by television. You know, they're doing other things. You know, it's a Saturday, by the way. They got 2 crews generally working, and there's probably some smash and grab robbery they're at or something of that nature. But no, you know, there is a lack of coverage of the big picture issues, I think, in television nowadays. I'd like to think that now that I'm working back on the print side of it at the Chronicle, that we're doing a pretty good job of covering the big picture on this one. Thank you. I'll tell you an interesting story. During the storm, I got a phone call from Jeff Cohen, who was the editor of the opinion pages. He got us all on the phone, a conference call, and we're all holed up at our houses at this point. And he says, listen, everybody else is out there sticking their fingers in holes in the dikes. They're thinking about covering the emergency. You guys, I want you to think about where we're going to go 1 year from now, 5 years from now. And I want you to come up with a list of smart people that we need to talk to. And I want to hear from you in a couple of days about that. And within 4 or 5 days, we had all these people coming in talking to us about where we needed to go. And I felt pretty good about that. As a guy who spent most of my life in television where it's all short-term thinking, it felt good that we were thinking long-term. And you know, that's a good thing. Again. And I think people are aware of that. I think people now are aware we have to do some long-term thinking. We can't just say, well, okay, we got hit by a hurricane again. It'll happen again in another 10 years, and you know, we'll get through that and fix the roof. I think people are very much aware that there needs to be some sort of addressing of structural and long-term issues. Anybody else?
Yeah, just very quickly, I will say Public Citizen's DC office did an analysis of coverage of both Hurricanes Harvey and Maria, and it tallied when news pieces referenced climate change in the context of those storms. At the time we did that analysis, it was about 15% of the stories, and we found that 2 of the major broadcast outlets had never mentioned climate change. And I'm happy to say, since then, one of those outlets has, But if you're interested in seeing that report, it was published last year. It's available on Public Citizen's website, citizen.org.
I think that media coverage of climate change in the frame of Harvey, part of that is that we were in full-on recovery mode, and if someone lost their house, if someone lost a family member, if someone lost everything, the first thing they want to hear is not climate change. It's how do I get shelter? How do I get food and water? How do I get clothes? And we have to be respectful of that. That doesn't mean we're not working on it. It doesn't mean definitely other places are talking about it. But I think here in Houston, that was everybody's immediate focus. I will say though, pre-Harvey and post-Harvey, I do not think the media covers it enough. The city has had some really great announcements, and I don't think it gets picked up, and maybe you can tell me why. The City of Houston is the largest municipal user of renewable energy in the country. And I don't think anybody else. We are 89% renewable right now. We want to hit 100. We're sort of ramping it up. And we had a big bump this last year because we opened our first solar farm. We have a solar farm in Alpine, Texas. It launched on Earth Day. Crickets from the media. Crickets. And that's just, you know, there's only so much we can do about that. We can't put up billboards, we can't do TV advertisements, we have no budget for that. So we put things out, we talk to the media, and I know the Chronicle has like covered it loosely, but it doesn't get that kind of traction. Maybe Harvey will help that, maybe that will help get more attention. I know definitely people are more interested. Will the media show more interest? Not sure. And then also that question of long-term planning and resilience. Everybody's talking about resilience right now and what that means. We say that we have 1 year and people will lose interest, but resilience is looking at all of the impacts of climate change, economic change, social change 50 years from now. People tend to forget that even though we've been flooding the past couple of years, before that we were in a really severe drought. Remember when Bastrop caught on fire? That fire was bigger than the state of Rhode Island. So we go in cycles, and who knows what will come next. And so hopefully the media will, in this discussion of Harvey, start talking about what are we doing, how are we looking to the future, what's that going to look like?
Okay, two closely related questions. Well, Lara, is there opportunity for the Mayor's Council and Covenants to endorse CCL's CF&D? And for Lara, do you think the city could take a formal stand, supportive council vote, something like that, on CCL's focus?
I'd say I'm happy to talk about that. That's not necessarily something that you all would want Houston City Council to do. It might not go the way you want it to go. But absolutely happy to discuss further and talk about how all of those networks that we're in, and we are trying really hard, especially through Climate Mayors, to educate other mayors in other cities on what's going on, make sure we're all on the same page, and there are so many different groups out there all doing good things. How do we make sure that we take that good work they're all doing and put it on one place so that when we need a statistic, when we need some type of information really quickly, that we have that and we can use it and we can respond. There's news happening every day from the administration, from just things are happening, and we're trying to help mobilize mayors so that they can react accordingly.
I'll tell you something I observed watching city government for many, many years. Most of the mayors I covered, if not all of them, kind of like to avoid resolutions on whatever issue is out there. There was a few years ago, somebody tried to get a resolution on slavery reparations, and it turned out to be this argument between council members. It was just, and eventually people were saying, all right, what does this have to do with paving my streets? What does this have to do with law enforcement, with whatever? So they tend to try to stay away from those. And one of the points that was made during that whole debate was, look, where do we go from here? Are we going to start doing abortion resolutions? Are we going to start doing all, this is how you get toward, Washington-style government, when you start arguing about these issues that you just can't have any impact on locally. If it's just a matter of a resolution in support of something, you know, I think like Laura said, that could backfire on you, to be honest. That's my feeling.
A set of questions that are all related to the issues of preparedness, response, resiliency, and each of you can address whichever topic in there what you most want to comment on. First card, please tell us that our reaction to Hurricane Harvey was not a make it up as you went along kind of approach. For example, were the city's actions informed by lessons learned from other disasters like Hurricane Katrina? Second question, specifically directed to Adrian. FEMA has two main purposes, disaster preparation and recovery. It seems that for Houston and Puerto Rico, they were woefully unprepared. What can we do about it? Third question, if we spend 100% of our resources on resiliency, which sort of efforts everyone can support, but none on climate change, will not the deteriorating climate even today totally overpower whatever we can do on resiliency? And lastly, in very big script, why are political leaders, doing nothing to prepare?
So I spent about a year after Hurricane Rita trying to figure out how do you get ready for the next storm. It is an enormously complex problem. And I'll just give you one little example. We lost in Rita, about 130 people died in evacuation. The vast majority of those were seniors that died on the road trying to get out of town when they didn't even need to evacuate in the first place. And so we had one day that we had nursing homes come in and talk to us about what do you do about evacuating. Every single nursing home that evacuated lost at least one patient in the evacuation. And so when you start talking about, you know, we think about our own experience. I'm going to grab my dog and my jewelry and whatever, and I'm going to rush out of town. But there are a lot of people that don't have the ability to do that. And you take that and you compound that 1,000 times by all the other factors. You know, I don't know if y'all saw that in the national media there was a bunch of criticism of Turner about not evacuating the city. Well, and the New York Times called me, since I'd run against him and we'd had a close runoff, and said, don't you think he made a mistake in not evacuating the city? Thinking that since I was opponent, I'd dump on him. And I said, well, actually, since I wrote the evacuation plan he was using, no, I don't think he should have done that. But it's the sort of, there's all these real simple, ready answers for people who haven't dug down into these issues. And, but there are things that I think that we've not prepared for. We haven't prepared adequately for high water evacuations. The fire department was completely disorganized this time. There was a general order that went out from the city to firefighters not to show up during the storm. Now, the vast majority of firefighters ignored that order and went in anyway, and they borrowed their neighbors' bass boats and all kinds of stuff. But we were clearly not prepared for the number of high water evacuations we need to. We need to think through those things. But unfortunately, until you go through one of these, it's really hard to figure out what you need and how you stage it. We've got a fairly decent evacuation plan now for the area. If you compare and contrast the Rita evacuation to the Ike evacuation went much smoother because we thought about all those things in Rita. But every one of these storms is a little bit different, kind of like generals fighting the last battle. We learned something from every one of them. It's very, very difficult to prepare for every contingency.
All right, so I think the question for me was, how am I personally going to fix the FEMA process? And I just want to say to the questioner, I really appreciate your confidence in my abilities here. If I knew how to fix the FEMA process, I probably wouldn't be here today. So I'm just going to talk about something entirely different, which is another constituency that we really haven't talked about much here. And that is the petrochemical companies that are sited here in Houston and that are headquartered here in Houston, and the group of companies, which is mostly but not exclusively petrochemical companies, that we call the climate polluters. There was a report that came out by the Union of Concerned Scientists recently that quantified the contribution of climate pollutants from the largest 50 or so companies globally. And there are individual companies that are contributing something like 1 to 2% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So those companies by themselves are making measurable impacts to climate. And we also have research now that is allowing us to, first of all, it's impossible to ascribe a particular storm to climate change, right? We can't say Harvey happened because of climate change. We just don't know. But we do know that these storms are made more intense in a general way by climate change, and there have been attempts to quantify those impacts. So what we think this leads to is the inevitable conclusion that the climate polluters, the companies who in a very real way are responsible for the situation we are in today, should be owning that responsibility and should be reacting by helping us to prepare for the next storm. And by that I mean actually financially contributing to the recovery effort, to the resiliency effort. This needs to happen. Some of our most profitable companies in the planet have not contributed to the recovery efforts. And without being pushed by the public, probably will not see any obligation to contribute in the future. So it is time to ask now, what is the role of climate polluters? They've caused these problems, they've contributed to them, what are they going to do to fix them?
So I'll answer two of those questions. One was the city flying by the seat of its pants? We do emergency planning all the time. We had a big planning session on Monday, and the scenario was what happens if my building, the 611 Walker, which is the administrative building, catches on fire? How does the city continue to operate if the building is shut down? I'm not joking, on Friday, our building caught on fire. We think, and I haven't been able to get back in my building, but I think it was a car in the garage, and then it just caused a lot of smoke to go in the building. But that's an example of, like, we are prepared for many different scenarios. Everybody knows what to do. I'm sad my office didn't grab my laptop because I was at a meeting, but other than that, I think we were fine. Harvey is an example of, we have extensive planning from Rita and Tropical Storm Allison. Tropical Storm Allison was the last time the city had a lot of city operations had flood damage, and so much of our preparations were at Tropical Storm Allison level, that everyone's knee-jerk reaction after something happens is to make sure that that doesn't happen again, just like that. So Harvey tells us two things. One, it was way bigger than Allison, and we didn't prepare enough. But no one, if you had asked us a year ago, would have thought Harvey was possible. A 40,000-year storm, right? We talk about 100-year floodplain and 500-year flood. 40,000. Two, it tells us our math is wrong, and that we need to really reevaluate all of that. And that's what we're doing right now as we're thinking about rebuilding. My building flooded. We have tunnels that connect all of downtown, and then we have parking garages that are underground. And Adrian talked about how we lost our EV fleet, our fleet share program, which is one of my favorite things. And I have been working so hard to rebuild it back, and I'm actually really glad we haven't installed everything yet, if that's where the fire was on Friday. But we had submarine doors to protect those cars. We thought that they were safe. And those submarine doors were not strong enough, and they actually became shrapnel and like took out everything in their path. So, I don't want you to think that we weren't prepared, but it's really changing, thinking outside the box, and how do you prepare for things that seemed impossible? And then, how scary is it to think that now Harvey's happened, how do you prepare for the next thing? Like, what is that going to be like? We're all cities, counties, we're all working together to kind of think through those scenarios. And also now we're thinking about not just building back right where you were, again, but maybe we need to be rethinking entirely what that looks like. Then the other question was, if we're focusing on resiliency and we ignore climate change, won't we be even worse off? And that is a great question. I don't know who asked that, but that is something that I say almost every single day as we're talking. Because right now resiliency means flooding, and how do we make sure we stop flooding? And we absolutely need to stop, work on flooding so that we can not be threatened by that, because that will threaten our economy. It's just a serious problem for City of Houston. If you look at the Amazon headquarters issue, that definitely played a part into it. We need to figure out that. But we also have to be planning for the future, and that's what my office is doing. That we are working on a climate action plan, and then we're also working on a resiliency plan that is resiliency in a big, broad term of heat and flood and extreme cold, and what happens when we have more diseases like Zika and just all types of really exciting positive scenario planning. And that climate change plays into that. How do you find those risks, right? And the risks that we're facing right now, people think our climate has changed. But understand that our climate is going to keep changing if we don't do something, that it will keep getting worse. We're going to keep moving in the wrong direction. What can we do as Houston to do our part to move in the right direction? And then what can we do to get really large action? Because Houston can do everything we possibly can, and that alone isn't going to be enough, right? It needs a whole state, it needs a countries working together. So every little bit counts, but we really are still working on climate change. That hasn't been completely forgotten.
I'm afraid we're out of time, so I have to unfortunately shut the discussion down at this point. But please join me in thanking our panel for some really